name is Gene Sharp, and this is the work I do. Primarily, I try to understand the nature and potential of nonviolent forms of struggle to undermine dictatorships. The extreme repression comes when a dictatorship really is frightened, and therefore they act ruthlessly.
A quiet 83-year-old man from Boston, Massachusetts, is arguably the fuse that sparked the Jasmine Revolution in the Arab world. An ocean away from the Middle East, Gene Sharp continues to talk about the nonviolent protests, which he has practiced and written books and articles on for more than half a century. His most notable and best-known book, From Dictatorship to Democracy, has inspired dissidents in countries around the world, and most recently in the Arab world, including Egypt.
In Egypt, they seem to have had good planning, and they, for quite some time, and they also managed to communicate to masses of people the importance of losing fear. There's so many people saying, we are not afraid anymore.
They've been waiting for this knowledge, and Gene provided it.
Having read the book, here are a few notable insights that the author shares with us. First one is regarding the impact of social groups like families, religious organizations, cultural associations, sports clubs, economic institutions, trade unions, student associations, gardening clubs, human rights associations, music societies, literary societies, and others. Unlike social groups, isolated individuals, not members of such groups, usually are unable to make a significant impact on the rest of the society. The government already knows this, and today, most, if not all, these groups have been infiltrated and politicized. These groups have been deliberately weakened, subordinated, or even replaced by new regimented institutions used by the state or ruling party to control the society. PC culture and nationalism are good examples which show how social groups are subverted. The population has often been atomized or turned into a mass of isolated individuals, unable to work together to achieve freedom, unable to confide in each other or even to do much of anything at their own initiative. The result is predictable. The population becomes weak, lacks self-confidence, and is incapable of resistance. People are often too frightened to share their hatred of the dictatorship and their hunger for freedom even with friends and family. People are often too terrified to think seriously of public resistance. He now talks about the weaknesses of totalitarian regimes. Regional, class, cultural, or national differences may become acute. This can strengthen the local community, which can eventually lead to an off-grid system where people reduce dependence on the government. The general public may, over time, become apathetic, skeptical, and even hostile to the regime. Intellectuals and students may become restless in response to conditions, restrictions, doctrinalism, and repression. Internal institutional conflicts and personal rivalries and hostilities may harm and even disrupt the operation of the dictatorship. This is often the case, and these governments are not omnipotent. Often, deteriorating efficiency and competency of bureaucracy or excessive controls and regulations are a sign of this. Thus, the system's policies and operation will be ineffective without the express consent and cooperation of the public. Next, we take a look at how to plan a strategy. The psychological and ideological influences called intangible factors that usually induce the people to obey and assist the rulers are weakened or reversed. The population will become more inclined to disobey and not to cooperate. The Mormons are a golden example of how governments are unnecessary and local communities can thrive without governments. By showing people an alternative, one can easily end the tyranny. Furthermore, resistance planners will need to take measures to preserve the order and to meet social needs by one's own forces during mass resistance against dictatorial controls. This will not only create alternative, independent, democratic structures and meet genuine needs, but will also reduce the credibility of any claims that ruthless repression is required to halt disorder and lawlessness. We now take a look at civil disobedience and non-cooperation. The methods of non-violent protest and persuasion are largely symbolic demonstrations, including parades, marches, and vigils. Further 54 methods are included in the book. These methods are easily countered by the government through the means of infiltrating the protest and turning them violent. Once the protesters are violent, the police are free to crack down in order to uphold law and order. Such protests can quickly be killed in this manner, and eventually, due to the deterioration of the situation, martial law could be enforced by the government. Next, we look at social non-cooperation, which includes non-cooperation with authorities, boycott of social events, and other social disobedience. By performing these acts, the government machinery will slowly grind to a halt. Economic non-cooperation, which includes boycotts and strikes. There are 50 odd methods in both these categories, like non-consumption of boycotted goods, traders boycott, picketing, sit-downs against corrupt government and corporates, blacklists and embargoes further pressure the corrupt governments. The recent farmers' protests in India succeeded in pushing back pro-corporate legislations is a great example of the effectiveness of such techniques. Political non-cooperation, including public speeches advocating non-cooperation, boycott of government departments, agencies and other bodies, slow compliance, disguised disobedience, etc. Here, slow compliance is a great tool where people need not directly disobey government mandates outright. However, they can wait it out. For example, when the government announces a mandatory registration system, don't register right away. Wait for the government to come to you and get the required data. Use their same tactics against us. The judiciary, executive, and legislature are often plagued by endless delays, and basically they are very slow and incompetent. The same scenario is seen in the corporate structures. Non-violent intervention by psychological, physical, social, economic or political means like fasting, non-violent occupation and parallel government is the final group. This is one of the most important aspects of all civil disobedience. Instead of depending on the government for basic facilities like food, water, electricity, transport, etc., work towards building a community-based, self-sufficient system using solar panels, growing our own food, bicycles as a means of transport, rainwater harvesting, and anything else that reduces dependence on governments. One major criticism that can be made is the fact that even though dozens of countries like Burma, Egypt, Philippines, Estonia, Latvia, Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia and Slovenia, Madagascar, Mali, Bolivia and a lot of others have succeeded in overthrowing tyrannical regimes, one dictator was replaced by the next, and the people are still ruled by totalitarian regimes world over. It can be concluded that while these tools are extremely effective in paralyzing the state apparatus, without the adequate planning in terms of establishing an alternative or parallel system that removes dependency on the government, basically empowering the people to be self-sufficient in terms of food, water, energy, transport and other basic necessities, the current system will continue.
For over 300,000 years, long before the first empires of Asia and Europe began to absorb surrounding tribes, humans organized themselves using a very different model. Rather than building top-down stratified societies that concentrated wealth and power in the hands of an upper class, these cultures organized horizontally. Organizing horizontally didn't mean that there were no leaders. The authority and conformity instincts are far older than humanity. Like all social animals, our species is hardwired to follow those who demonstrate courage and intelligence. However, in horizontal societies, disparities of wealth and power were significantly smaller. The leaders and councils responsible for group decisions were not insulated by armies and law enforcement, conditioned to obey without question. Defense and order were maintained by an armed citizenry, bound by a code of conduct. This dynamic forced leaders to be directly accountable to the population. Their power was rooted in their ability to communicate with the people, build consensus, and chart a course of action to the benefit of all. The fact that horizontal societies required leaders to work with the public in such a personal way had one obvious disadvantage. It limited the size of the group. After all, why would someone voluntarily follow someone far away that they had never met? There is, however, a way around this limitation. By forming federations, horizontal societies can expand their sphere of influence significantly. An example of this adaptation can be found in the Iroquois Confederacy, which unified 5 tribes for hundreds of years in a region that came to be called New York. Each member tribe in the Confederacy had their own culture and internal governance, but a set of shared values enabled them to cooperate economically and militarily. If one tribe was attacked, they quickly mounted a common defense. Many historians believe that the United States federal system was based on the Iroquois model. One significant difference, however, was that the Iroquois had no central government. There was a central council comprised of representatives from each tribe, but this council had no power to enforce its will. Each representative was tasked with building a consensus that would resonate with their people. Modernized adaptation of this Iroquois model gained traction in the mid-2020s as the gears of globalization ground to a halt. While governments proved incapable of solving the most basic problems, decentralized networks were replacing the system from the ground up. They would start by organizing local food production in their communities and gradually expand cooperation to other sectors. Their revolution was driven by an idea worth spreading. Not only was it possible to live on this planet without destroying it, this way of life was more abundant and more fulfilling than the alternative. There was no need to wait for governments to act. Humans were perfectly capable of organizing themselves. Those that succeeded became epicenters of a new renaissance, attracting skilled workers and artists from around the world. Some of these travelers would put down permanent roots. Others would return to their homeland to plant seeds of their own. From the fragments of fallen empires, new nations would be born. From the ashes of dying cultures, new cultures would rise. The great collapse of the 2020s was not the end of the world. It was the end of an era and the dawn of a new one. Remember how we said this story has multiple endings? We're going to take one of them to a literal extreme, and we're going to do it in the real world. Now, if you're living in a crowded city center, maybe pushing the boundaries starts by planting a garden in your front yard, organizing a community compost, or speaking out against a war. However, it's important to understand that in the era that we have entered, the stakes are rising, and the trajectory we're on needs to be altered significantly. This implies fundamental changes in the way we live, not just gestures in the right direction. You have to decide what kind of story you and your family want to be a part of. In some cases, this might involve immigrating to another country. Others will be more inclined to stay and fight to change the outcome at home. One way or the other, you'll want to be in a place where you can grow food, and you'll want to be set up to do this without agrochemical inputs or fossil fuels. You also don't want to be reliant on the grid. Utilities can and will go down. Some will be shocked by how long they can stay down. These aren't the kind of lifestyle changes you want to make at the last moment, or put off until you can do something large scale. Far better to start transitioning to a new way of life right now. Do what you can with what you have. Join forces with others to amplify. The learning curve for this kind of transition can be steep. There are a lot of practical skills that we should be taught in school, but aren't. Most kids when they graduate don't know how to build a house, or grow a garden, or even how to make bread. The best way to learn this stuff isn't really in a classroom anyway. People learn best by example, anchored with hands-on experience. That's why we built this place. You could think of it as an experiential learning center / makerspace. This whole landscape is a laboratory. Here we can put ideas to an extreme test. Rather than just reading about this stuff or watching a presentation, volunteers and travelers from all over the world come here to try it themselves. They get their hands dirty in the field, planting plants, working with animals, building crazy structures like these. They also get to experience firsthand what it takes to self-organize and live in a different way. The experience is extreme because the challenges we face are real. We're completely off-grid here. Our electricity comes from the sun. We have running water by pumping from the spring up to a tank on the hill. It's also up to us to maintain the road and the drainage. Up here, when there's a problem, we have to put our heads together and find a way to solve it. To put this in perspective, our first long-term volunteer was here when we sustained a direct hit from Hurricane Maria. He also assisted in the recovery and became part of the story. Talk is cheap. If you really want to change the world, you have to be able to show people how. We're doing this here in the Commonwealth of Dominica because these people are moving in the right direction, and their culture holds some of the keys to the solution. But wherever you decide to make your stand, now is the time to get serious about food security. Our challenge in the next phase is to grow more and develop local production systems to replace imports. Some will have a chance to collaborate on site. Others will integrate this information and use it creatively, writing themselves into the story in unpredictable ways.